I am joined today by a truly special person, scholar, teacher, academic, and honestly treasure to this world. He is well known for his biography of Aleister Crowley, Perdurabo, and he is such a light in this world that cannot be understated. So thank you so much to Richard for being here. We are going to talk all about your writing and in particular Friendship in Doubt, which recently came out, and I'm so excited to be interviewing you. So I think most people listening and watching today know who you are, but for the uninitiated, could you please introduce yourself?
Well, sure, but first I'd like to say thank you for that lovely introduction and also for the invitation to be interviewed on your channel. My name is Richard Kaczynski, and by day I am a biostatistician and research scientist. And in my off hours, I am a scholar of Western esotericism and uh, Western ceremonial magic traditions with an emphasis on Aleister Crowley and his circle. And as you mentioned, I am the author of Perdurabo, The Life of Aleister Crowley, as well as a few other related titles, such as The Wiser Concise Guide to Aleister Crowley, the book Forgotten Templars, The Untold Origins of Ordo Templi Orientis, as well as Friendship in Doubt. I also co-edited with Hymenaeus Beta the Oriflamme collection of Crowley's writings called The Revival of Magic and Other Essays. And I've also edited an edition, a critical edition of Aleister Crowley's book, The Sword of Song, one of his first talismanic, or actually his very first talismanic magical book, which came out a couple years ago from Camuret Press, and we'll be seeing a re-release soon. And yeah, so I've also just kind of traveled and lectured, around the world on these subjects, and I'm glad to be here to talk about them with you today.
Yeah, wonderful to have you. And on sort of going off about what you just said, a lot of people were disappointed they did not get a copy of Sort of Song when it was released. So good news, like he said, that is coming back out, and so stay tuned for that. And if you ever get a chance to see Richard lecture, either live or virtually, I cannot recommend it enough. You do have a few lectures coming up. Could you say a little bit about what you'll be speaking on at ThelemaCon?
Sure, yeah, Thalemacon is one of the upcoming things that are coming up. And for Thalemacon, which has a live and a virtual component, I will be speaking on two subjects. One will be on friendship and doubt. It's to kind of as kind of a bookend the early part of Crowley's life, and then the second talk I'll be giving will be on the relationship between Aleister Crowley and Gerald Gardner, which happened in the last year or two of Crowley's life. So these are kind of where Crowley started and where he ended. I will also be giving a talk for the European OTO gathering later this month on the topic of Jack Parsons and his approach to the witchcraft, which is his attempt to try and make a more mainstream and accessible version of magic. And in November, I will be giving a talk at the AOTO conference in New Orleans on the subject of Theodore Schroeder, who is not only a friend of Aleister Crowley, but someone who shared interests in the sense that he had this theory of the eratogenic interpretation of religion, the idea that religion has its basis in the sex instinct and the creative impulse. But in Theodore Schroeder also has the distinction of having discovered the esoteric writings of Ida Craddock, who then, and those writings in turn, very much had a big influence on the Thelemic movement. So I'll be diving into that as well. I think that covers at least the next 2 or 3 months
Yeah.
talks.
A lot to look forward to for sure. And this book is really a treat because this is an academic look at a lot of stuff that has not been explored in depth before. So, in your own words, what is Friendship and Doubt about, and what was your inspiration for this book?
Well, what it's about is it's the first book to take a look at the three founding members of Thelema, Aleister Crowley, of course, but also JFC Fuller and Victor Neuburg, who together were kind of the creative nucleus in the founding of Thelema and the AA and so on. And this is the first book to, excuse me, to look at them and the influence that agnosticism and the secularist movement had on them as individuals, how it brought them together, and how it influenced their approach to thelema in its foundational years. It's also the first book to reprint all of their collected essays and poetry and so on related to the agnostic, free thoughts, and secularist movement. These things were all published in the journals of that movement and have never been reprinted before, and they only exist in like the Library of Congress and the British Library. So while they exist in the world out there, they're not really accessible to most people. And so those materials have been included in the book to kind of give a snapshot of intellectually and philosophically where the three of them started on their journey together. And of course, all that material has been thoroughly annotated with an editorial apparatus, kind of explaining some of the stuff we're talking about that may not make sense to a 21st century reader.
That is fantastic to hear. There's so much good, previously unavailable material in this book, and something especially for people who are interested in ceremonial magic, Western esotericism, Aleister Crowley, all of these subjects, as well as the free thought movement in general, which we'll get into later in this interview.
All right.
But to get access to this book, because it will be extremely valuable to you. So I do have a question. How would you say Friendship and Doubt differs from your previous works on Aleister Crowley? Now, I know, of course, there is some overlap there, of course, with Perdurabo, but could you elaborate on that a little bit?
Sure. I mean, I guess the main difference is that Perdurabo paints Aleister Crowley's life in very broad strokes. I mean, we're telling his whole story from his family history to the time that he died, and also the influence that he had on others after his death. So it's a biography of his full life. But some of the other books I've written since then have been more like very narrow, deep dives into subject matter. For instance, Panic in Detroit focuses specifically on the years 1918 to 1922, more or less, which coincides with Aleister Crowley's time in Detroit trying to establish a Supreme Grand Council of OTO and the moral panic that ensued around all of that. And in a similar way, Friendship and Doubt zeroes in on the years like 1902 to about 1912, 13, which covers these foundational years of Thelema and the lead up to it, and everyone's introduction to the agnostic and free thought movement. And the advantage of having this really narrow focus, not trying to tell this whole story, but just focusing on one subject like agnosticism, um, is that you can go really deep. These elements of the story, many of them have been out there. If you read through the Equinox, for instance, you'll see references repeatedly to the agnostic movement, but no one's ever like threaded that needle and pulled all these sources together, as well as a whole bunch of unrelated, previously untapped sources as well. But the way that this differs from other people's or previous understanding of our three principles, Crowley, Fuller, Neuburg, is that there's generally been this idea that there's a point right around 1912, 1913, where there was a breaking point and all of these people just kind of went their separate ways and never talked to each other again. And they never wanted anything to do with each other again. And in a way, that's kind of the point of the double entendre of the title. Friendship and Doubt deals not only just with the whole movement of doubt or agnosticism, but it also deals with the idea is there friendship existing or not? Is there some question there? And what I tried to establish in this book is that as their lives went on later, they continued to be influenced by those formative years in Thelema, and that they, in fact, many, many years later, even after parting and not speaking to each other, Fuller and Neuburg nevertheless admired, appreciated, or defended Crowley in their last years. So I think that very much kind of adds a new shade. It doesn't necessarily overturn that understanding, but I think it kind of reframes it, not as that they broke off, but that they kind of stayed at a distance, but nevertheless maintained that appreciation years and decades on.
Yeah, I imagine that's really going to shake some common narratives people are already familiar with. And a lot of people hear these stories about Crowley and his life, which are sort of dramatic fictions. And I really appreciate the deep level of scholarship in your books, whether it's Perdurabo or Friendship and Doubt, where you really get into it, examine the evidence over time, and present what was actually the case and what was actually going on. So I do want to bring up, I think for a lot of our viewers, they might be interested in the more personal connection you had with writing this book. So I'm I'm referring to this lovely inscription you left me. Do you want to get into that story a little bit before we move on?
Sure thing. Um, well, it's probably no secret to your viewers that you and I are in a serious relationship, and the story of how that happened is wound up in both the book, The Sword of Song, and the whole free thought movement. And the way that happened, as you know, but your viewers may not know, is that we knew each other on Twitter kind of casually as people in the area who were interested in vegetarianism and Crowley, but didn't really know a whole lot about each other. But when um, the Sword of Song came out for Camuret Press, and I had a few extra copies that I was selling, that Lynn here reached out and wanted to purchase a copy. And my standard procedure had been to mail copies out FedEx, which is actually the cheapest, FedEx Ground is the cheapest way of getting that to someone in a very secure and safe way. But since Lynn was in the same town, I felt kind of bad charging $15 for an already expensive book just to ship it, within the town limits. So I suggested, hey, why don't we just meet for lunch somewhere and I'll hand you the book and save you $15 in shipping, which is what we did. And as we began to talk, we were, I think, both kind of stunned and taken aback by some very weird sorts of similarities and interests that we had. I mean, of course, okay, we're Thelemites, so there's some things you might expect. Yes, we're Thelemites, therefore we're interested in the works of Aleister Crowley and related figures. Even the fact that we're both vegetarians may not be that weird. I mean, not all Thelemites are vegetarians, but I mean that still happens. But where it got weird was where Lynn talked about having pet quails, and that has some relevance to my own chosen family back in Detroit. So and again, I've never known anyone else to have pet quails. But the thing that floored me was when we met, I was working on Friendship and Doubt. I was very deep into wrapping it up and submitting this to Oxford University Press. And in this luncheon meeting, Lynn mentioned that she, for 2 years, had been president of her University Freethought Association. I was like, no way. And so anyway, Lynn, struck me as a very amazing and fascinating person. So we just started hanging out, watching movies and whatnot. And then, the rest is history.
Yeah, thank you so much for taking the time to share that. What an amazing, fateful encounter, and some of that, those connections are so interesting, and it's great to finally be doing an interview, especially about Friendship and Doubt, because with my own background in free thought and Thelema and Aleister Crowley and all of that, but also to be doing it with you. So, if my viewers and listeners have not heard that story about how Richard and I met, now you have. So, thank you for that little detour. I do want to ask too. How do you think modern Thelema today considers its roots in agnosticism and free thought? Do you feel like this is something openly discussed in the community or not so much?
Hmm. That's a good question. I think it goes a little both ways. Um, because, Thelema often is, the Book of the Law, for instance, is taken as this holy text, this Class A document that cannot be changed so much in the style of a letter, so that it's lest its meaning be effaced or changed or what have you. And So I think that can lead people to a certain dogmatism
Mm.
about what it means to be a Thelemite. Um, but at the same time, I think there's elements there that allow for doubt and for questioning. And those are things like, how do you interpret the Book of the Law? And the short comment indicates that everyone should, study Crowley and his writings and come to their own understanding of the text. There's a whole question of what does it mean to accept the Book of the Law, and that in the case of, say, OTO, for instance, is very much left to the discretion of the individual. It's, they can define that however they choose and still be considered Thelemites. And I think there are some things in our mysteries that acknowledge um, that we don't know the answers to things. And I think one of my favorite examples of this is the end collect in the Gnostic Mass. That starts, to them from whose eyes the veil of death have fallen, let them be granted the accomplishment of their true wills, whether they will absorption in the infinite or, to achieve the heroism of incarnation on this planet or another, or aught else, and it kind of goes on. But the idea there seems to be that we don't know what happens after we die, and that collects, which I've kind of haphazardly paraphrased there, um, leaves open the possibility that one or more of these things may be true, or it may depend on the individual, what happens even, and what they believe. And even though, in Thelema, we've got these ideas about, the holy guardian angel, for instance, or reincarnation and Liber Fischarb and doing, past life recall and things like that. Crowley acknowledges in Magic Without Tears, for example, that we don't know what happens when we die. And he can talk about what his experiences are and what his beliefs are, but he acknowledges that we just don't know, and we won't know until that time comes. And I think it's really worth embracing that. But also, I think we also have some baked-in skepticism with Crowley's scientific illuminism and his pushing of approaching magic with the method of science, that we don't take things on faith alone. It's a certainty, not faith, as the Book of the Law says, and that we evaluate our magical work using empirical evidence and deciding for ourselves which things work and which things don't work. And once again, Crowley says that what worked for him, his methods, may not work for you, and you need to figure out what works best for you for yourself, using this scientific approach and this methodical analysis of what works and what doesn't for you.
Wonderful. So, what do you hope readers will gain from exploring this particular bit of history around Aleister Crowley that you do in your book?
I'm sorry, could you repeat that, please?
Sure, sure. What are you hoping that your readers are going to get from exploring this particular set of history and the stories around Aleister Crowley and his acquaintances and friends in your book?
Uh, yeah, I guess the thing I would hope that readers get is that um, agnosticism, again, is a topic that has not really been covered or given too much attention historically in talking about Crowley, and that people will come to see how agnosticism did play a big role in a lot of the things that Crowley and company did in the first, decade of Thelema. Everything from, these ideas of scientific illuminism to, publishing the Equinox, to Crowley starting his own publishing company, and just again a lot of these other ideas that are kind of baked into the system, are very much influenced by agnosticism, and even like the other writers that agnosticism held up. And because one of the interesting things about the agnostic literature is it's not that it's against religion per se. What agnosticism and the free thought and the secularist movement was mostly about keeping religion out of civic life. That you can have your religion, but what we do in society and politics and in law and those sorts of things, um, should be separate, and then they should be based on evidence, not your own personal beliefs. And so to that extent, a lot of this movement pushed back against Christianity, which was clearly the dominant force in people's lives, whether they wanted it or not at that time. And but at the same time, they were open to exploring other takes and other ways of understanding spirituality. So these journals, talked about people like Annie Besant and H.P. Blavatsky, and they were really excited and pushed books by people like J.G.R. Forlong, who was the Gnostic saint Forlong Dukes, and also pushing J.G.R. Fraser's The Golden Dawn, which was immensely influential on Aleister Crowley. So if you take a look at some of the recommended readings that Crowley puts out, there's a lot of overlap between that list and the sorts of texts that the agnostics and freethinkers were pushing at that time as well.
So that really sounds like, especially talking about this separation of the state from religion and a lot of these struggles that they were experiencing, that really echoes a lot of what we're seeing today. So, considering everything going on in our modern world, what lessons can we learn and apply today from these early freethinkers in history?
Yeah, one thing that really struck me about editing these texts, because some of them are pretty virulent and strongly worded. They weren't shying away from that, but at the same time, it also struck me how little things have changed,
Mm,
or if they have changed, how much we've kind of regressed back to this place where people are very much trying to force religion into the political dialogue and into the legal dialogue, and basically try to impose their views on everyone, regardless of whether they subscribe to those beliefs or not. And as we see throughout history, religion and politics are a bad combination. I mean, whether it be, the Inquisition, the Crusades, the witch trials, or what have you. I mean, it just doesn't end well. And um, in today's world, I mean, we just see so much hatred and discord and fear, um, and prejudice, that is spawned by people's faith, basically. Their religious beliefs kind of empower them to hate other people. And it kind of seems to me like if your religion is not filling you with love and compassion for your fellow man, there's something wrong there. And
yeah.
if instead your religion is filling you with hate for others, particularly marginalized groups that are, powerless or very disempowered compared to, the dominant religion, which kind of has immense power in this country and in this world, then people with that much hatred in their hearts due to their faith probably shouldn't be passing laws for the rest of us. And I'm not just talking about the U.S. either. I mean, we kind of see these sorts of divisions all over the world. I think if you look at India, you've got this conflict, this long-standing conflict, but it's been exacerbated in recent history between Muslims and Hindus, and there's a lot of we see the same sorts of frictions happening with the whole Palestinian situation and so on. And so it's um, just religion and politics. It sucks.
Yeah, those are some wise words and things I certainly needed to hear and really appreciate about the timeliness of this book. And I think a lot of people will as well. It's definitely worth looking at those who came before us and how they figured out their own lives, worked through their own struggles, and that's one of the things I've always really admired about your work and its dedication to historical events, historical figures, and sort of teasing out the truth there so that you may deliver a narrative and hopefully keep that memory of history alive and reflect upon it and what we're going through in the present. So, um, when we started this amazing interview, we did mention all of your amazing talks coming up. Are there any other projects coming up on the horizon, such as books, you would like to mention?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, and then before we get into that too, I think I would just like to say that I appreciate you recognizing my interest in his history and historicity and presenting the facts on the matter. And I think one thing I also want to make clear is that um, while something like Perdurabo or maybe even Friendship and Doubt, or even what we're saying in this interview, may be coming from a place of trying to understand where Crowley was coming from, and that has, that may lead some people to see, say, Perdurabo as being a more sympathetic portrayal. I think people have also recognized that I don't shy away from some of the more controversial aspects
Mm.
of his personality, and in presenting, history and facts. I'm not really trying to push a particular narrative. And I basically, I just want people to like read the stories, read the facts for themselves, kind of stripped of any of this, um, you know, this editorializing that some other writers are prone to, and just, trust that my readers have the intelligence and the sense to read a book and draw their own conclusions, whether they, love Crowley, hate him, whether they think his Gnosticism is interesting or not. I mean, whether it's relevant to our world today or not. I mean, just just check out the facts and decide for yourself.
Yeah, really good points, especially when we talk about such a controversial figure like Aleister Crowley, and a figure who there is so much misinformation out there. People just love to make stuff up about him because it makes money, because it gets attention. And the wilder the story, the better for some people. And then, of course, there's people who approach these difficult subjects in history, whether it's the British agnosticism and Freethought, whether it's Aleister Crowley in his life, whether it's Western esotericism, whatever it is. And I really see this approach from, I would say, bad faith. It's an approach of having an agenda they want to push, so they cherry pick facts and they tell the story they want to tell. Whereas I've always felt in your writing, you tell the story as close to truth as possible, and that really makes your writing stand out. Aside from the fact you're just an amazing writer, and every time it's actually funny because I do my own research in this area, and I'll come across an article you've written in something many years ago, and I'll start being like, "Yep, he's a good writer." And
Okay.
it's always a breath of fresh air to read things you've written, Richard. And I think a lot of people feel that way as well because you don't talk down to the reader, and I think that's really special. And I think it also reflects your background in science and being a scientist and having that academic rigor to critically evaluate information and suss out as close to truth as possible. So thank you for that.
Oh, my pleasure. And just for a moment here, Jean Ray wants to say hello to her.
Oh, hey, Jelly Bean.
Okay. I also just wanted to
She
put
is
her
so
down so
cute.
she's not distracting me. Um, but I
She's
mean,
like,
I
"What's?"
guess
She's like, "What's going on, Dad?"
oh,
You're
she knows when I'm on a conference call. She does that work all the time. When she hears voices coming out of the computer, she's like, "Oh, there's something to see."
She's like, "I recognize that voice.
Yeah.
That's that person who feeds me extra treats." And sometimes puts a funny costume on me.
Yeah.
Um,
But I mean, but coming back to what you were saying, though, I think the idea that I was saying just read the facts and draw your own conclusions.
hmm,
It's kind of the epitome of that whole free thought ethos as
yeah.
well. That I'm not going to tell you what to think. You figure it out yourself.
Yeah, and I think like in my own way, perhaps even from a practitioner standpoint, I love to arm people with ideas and the tools they need to come to their own conclusions. And that's why in my own writing and things I put together, I offer multiple ways to approach different subjects and multiple understandings so that it may inspire the reader or listener or whatever to their own truth. But of course, that's a different subject.
But a great subject all the same.
Yes, yes, so true. So, coming back to what we were just talking about, what else do you have on your horizon? Give us a teaser.
All right. Well, at the beginning, we talked about some upcoming talks, ThelemaCon, the European OTO gathering, and then the Academia OTO conference in New Orleans. But on the book front, let me kind of think about this chronologically. So there's Perturabo is going to have an audiobook release.
Yes.
It's at the end of October. I'm looking forward to that.
I'm so pumped about that, and I know a lot of other people are as well.
Yeah, so I've heard. So I'm excited. It's been a long time. I don't know what it was. Perturabo came. This edition came out in 2010, but for some reason, this was the year my publisher said, "Let's do the audiobook."
Awesome.
And because people have been asking me for years, but the thing folks need to understand is that the my publisher has the rights to the material, so I can't just decide, oh, I'm going to do an audiobook. That's
Hmm.
really their call. And so I'm really excited that they've gone ahead and take that step. And then also in terms of rights, they've also sold the French language rights to Perturabo. So there's a translation of that into French in the
Oh my
works.
gosh, how
Um,
wonderful.
no, I mean, no date on that just yet, but that kind of follows on the heels of the Spanish translation of Perturabo. And I think another thing I should mention is that when people often say, "Oh, why isn't Perturabo in this language or that language?" Um, the way that this has worked with Perturabo is that other translators or publishing companies have come to my publisher and said, "Hey, we would like to license the blah language rights to Perturabo." And my publisher will say, "Yeah, sure, go ahead. Here's the contract and the deal." And then the other translator and publisher will translate and publish the book. So once again, that's something that I have no say over. That's something that's up to my publisher, but also kind of up to other translators to approach the publisher with a proposal. So Perturabo audiobook coming out at the end of October. To cut to the chase here, and then in April, on April 8th, the first day of the writing of the Book of the Law, in fact, is the expected launch date for the new edition of the Sword of Song. The Camuret edition only came out in this edition of 333 copies, which basically, as you know, sold out in the weekend.
Yeah.
And so Inner Traditions will be putting this out in a nice deluxe edition. It's going to be in a large format, similar to in size to the Eric Purdue Three Books of Occult Philosophy, with the cardboard slipcase and the works. So it's going to be a really beautiful production. Um, and then later in the year, also coming out from Inner Traditions, is going to be a book currently titled Mind Over Magic, which is me kind of going back to my roots as a psychologist to examine how psychology sheds light on what happens to us or what we are doing when we are doing magic. Not as an attempt to write all of magic off as being psychological or in our heads, but just to acknowledge that there's psychology involved in everything that we do and to see what sorts of things we know from psychology that have a bearing on the daily practices and the ritual practices and other aspects of a magical practitioner's normal life. And that's true whether you're a ceremonial magician, a Wiccan or a pagan or Freemason or any other person that engages in some sort of mystical practice. So I hope that'll be something of interest to your viewers and hopefully even a wider audience too.
Oh, absolutely. And I'm actually in that book. So, fun fact, I'm so honored that I get to be a part of that. And I had minor contributions, ideas I passed off to you. So, the
Indeed.
whispers of me are in that book, but maybe in the future there will be more of me in printed works. We will see.
Why?
Yeah, I'm not to occupy this with my own stuff, but yeah, I think this book Mind Over Magic is going to be a bomb dropped on the magical community because you bring such an amazing rigorous academic perspective and that scientific perspective as a psychologist but also as a magical practitioner. And I think that's one thing I mourn is sometimes when people approach these topics is they don't really know what they're reading about, they don't know how to go through the literature, they don't know the jargon, but you do as an academic, especially in this area. So it's going to be an absolute joy and blessing to go on a journey and have other readers go on this journey of asking the question, where where does science take us? How far does science take us? And it doesn't, like you said, this book won't describe everything out there, but it says something's out there. And this is what we know. These are real human phenomenon or experiences. Multiple people have them across cultures. Different things are happening. You make a lot of connections that are going to be so fun to see come out and see people's reactions to that.
Yeah, I hope so. I mean, it gets technical in some places. I mean, we do get into p-values and meta-analysis, and research design, and stuff like that. But at the same time, I really make an effort to make it accessible and kind of ultimately relate everything back to the actual practices that people engage in, and try not to make it specific to any one particular path, but to kind of keep it broad enough that people from a variety of traditions could read this book and get something out of it.
Yeah, wonderful. So exciting. Thank you.
And that'll be
Um,
another talk for another day, I suppose.
yeah, yeah, definitely. Of course, I would love to have you back on. Every chance I get, I want to pick your brain and, and feature you because I adore and admire you so much. So for people who are listening to this, I'm going to assume most people are already familiar with you and where to find you. But for the people who aren't, what are the best ways or the best places to follow you on the internet or keep up with what you're publishing and what you're doing?
Sure. Thank you for asking. I am on various social media platforms. I'm on Facebook, Twitter/X, Instagram, Threads, Blue Sky. I also have a website at richard-kaczynski.com. And that website also has kind of a feed from my Instagram, or I'm sorry, from my Facebook page. So all of those are ways of keeping up on what I am up to.
Yeah, and from my experience, some of the best ways to follow Richard is on Facebook and Instagram. I feel like you're most active on there. And if someone would be interested in reaching out to you, your email is on your website, correct?
I believe so.
Yeah.
I've heard some
And
people say that they've had trouble using the email that's on the website because it's supposed to be like a forwarding email rather than my actual
okay.
email. So, yeah, I think so.
Yeah, so that is a question. And I think it's important to remember that Richard is a very popular guy, and if you reach out to him over social media and he misses it, don't take it personally. He has so much going on.
Yeah, I get stuff
Um,
on like Messenger and in Instagram messages and stuff all the time, and it's just hard to keep track of what's current and what's important to get back to and what isn't because there's just so much going on there.
yeah, but I think email is probably, if someone wants to contact you directly, their best bet. And some people try to go through me to talk to you, which is again not a good bet either
Yeah, you're
because
not my secretary.
that's gonna get lost in my own stuff, and I'm not Richard's secretary. Oh my gosh, what a joy and a pleasure to have you on today, Richard. Thank you so much for talking about this amazing book out for sale now. It does have a pretty price on it because it's an academic book from Oxford University Press, but nevertheless, there is a 30% coupon going around. You can get a hold of that and use that to purchase the book. But yeah, what a treasure and a joy. Thank you so much, Richard.
I will also just say that
Yes.
for a 30% discount, if you're looking for that, you can either see that some of my just go back through history of some of my posts on social media, and also there's a Facebook page for the Oxford University series in Western Esotericism, and that also had a recent post with a 30% discount. So
Awesome.
yeah, by all means, take advantage of that 'cause that's a big savings.
Yeah, and you can go buy Martin Starr's book too.
Yes, The Unknown God, an awesome book that's just been released, and it's if you don't know it and you're interested in Thelema, it's a must read.
Yeah, wonderful stuff. All right, thank you so much. And thank you so much for all of our viewers and listeners today. I appreciate you. As always, I am the center of expression for the primal will to good, and so are you.